My name is Mark Williams. I'm going to read a couple of poems from my new book, which is entitled Our Grieving Eden, and I hope you'll enjoy them. My book is in two sections, and I'm going to read a poem from each section. The first poem is the title poem from the first section. It's entitled Our Cocoon Less Bruised, and it's dedicated to my wife. We laboriously knitted to riper goodness while walking alongside Christian tenets of charity, faith, worship, and forgiveness, as two having come from rectitudinal families where the dinner table was no battlefield and manners are reflexive unless necessarily rejected in favor of freshly restless truth. If we were born into goodness and so raised, then the world's daily mischief and distemper startles us in this suddenly gaping crash pit between gifted mercy and tumbling skyscrapers, fire blown to the ground because flagitious zealots hard maim American arrogance. Husband and wife, never dumbly corrupted by all that disrupts us, we immured within our own notions of health and mild righteousness, to not waste ourselves on plastic gluttony, modernly offered as essentially useless garbage to the sententious primitives who hunted to eat, to be belly-fed, and never disfigured more than with vulgar talk. We dying because the cowardice of hidden hatred cripples the twitching victories of face to face. Nourishing food more than sweets and chips to keep our blood clear from clumped fat as we exercise to strain ourselves harder than vegetal resting before television's snoozing cackle, drinking little and no haze from tobacco or hemp to cloud our minds with organically pampering happiness, since our soul holes must be filled with the world's polluted beauty. There being no history earlier than our lifetimes any longer that thrives beyond beseeching museums. We go to bed before midnight every night, as sleep saves us from wearier afternoons. No late-night talk shows that are cartoons of conversation and selfish blather is the namesake of too many meetable people in the daytime. Hollywood is an old junkie whose fixes grow daily air-soaked and retching. Politics gathers its actors before the cameras, but the real work lingers where money is spent and the news burrows beneath the skin of flinching manly weather in ruptured prejudice and murder. The news of our world scars us every day, having awakened to rumors of rising paradise, though we never foolishly risk ourselves as daredevils in scary rides or hurtling cars, since injuries can become the unfading signatures of idiots trying to be stupidly famous. No contagious deficits in our attention to death's devouring chokehold, and so our dreams rarely black bottom into nightmares, startling our hearts crazily awake. Going to church eases the bland vacuum between our floundering righteousness in images of Father and Son who lost and regained life to blood bathe our salvation. So we give to those well-heartedly gifting to others in famine or disasters to save mewing children. Yet comes the common confession unto each other, once it has burdened us again, Our unfair judgment of others hones our tongues with pricklish spite against the poor, the ignorant, and the blowhards. Our good fortune lathers the pus of its abundance and sends us shuffling from Golgotha with many pocketed hands and whistling tunes of our reeking conceit. The second poem from the second section is a poem about baby boomers, of which I am one, and it's entitled Creaky and Leaking. Who else's summers, not otherwise loving, before where we gathered so far out west, with painted faces and flowers in our hair, to listen to how our music had blossomed through the songs of so many bands, suddenly rolling the putty of our young lives into cascading day stories, upbraiding us from the weight of our parents, to love ourselves through nights of moments, first at Monterey and then later on at Woodstock, loving what happens in the self-same magic youth nourishes as how the ideal Olympically triumphs before dying slower than we finally remember. We loved ourselves mostly with drugs, since without drugs we could not inhale our coarser selfishness, as one stabbed another to death in a crowd in front of a band who demanded shelter from our sober atrocities. You said we never obeyed or worked hard enough, were too lazy and heaven-bent. We laughed and cursed at you for never understanding how we soulfully differed from you, being mantic magicians, casting spells to haul joy back from the graves of your straight-laced regrets, if not truly the clever children of God. We spent our time chasing ragged images of how he looked and lived, our louder world, cracking the monasteries, hiding the chosen to drag you into our unrepentant pleasures. How long our hair grew, even while living at home, to irk your rectitudinally prized lackeydom as the standard against which our perfidy thrashed and eventually abandoned your hosting our wayward lives too tightly, our blurry clothes and staying out on farms to grow crops naturally resonant in our bellies, having traveled through minded correspondence to where you never ventured. What the press called the generation gap, how wide these rivery tantrums between fathers and your offspring, born of how time wavers our sentiments toward such writhing calamities of sense and purpose. We visited enough to not be fondly forgotten, but softly died between times. Neither of us proudly sanguine about bombing the Vietnamese, as children wailed from napalm over the roads, as half their country ate the wisdom of the other. Younger than certain, we read New Left notes, as the wiser propaganda authored by someone besides LBJ or Nixon. We hotly battling in Chicago because the draft nearly killed us in a war sullying America's honor to spare the holy value of freedom upon those innocents. After the war, helplessly strangled to death, many of us married and raised our children over 3 decades before turning 50 years old, 20 years into the vacuous territory of being untrustworthy and choked with history. We had school and careers, spouses and divorces, and told our children they could live as they wished, as though life was a happy democracy crowned upon every kid's head, telling them they were wonderful, even after they disobeyed and failed us. Discipline, the evaporating sand line, memorable for what only rarely happened. We loved cocaine and knew those with too many sexual diseases, shouldering Republican dogma and straying from our ideals to taste the bile of prejudice, rhetoric, once Nixon was finally impeached and Carter set himself on fire in the desert. Millions of canaries cackling over the years that Jesus was a Democratic fool. Our children found a third parent in junkied video games and left home only to return after college as the teenagers who grew sideways, scolding their drug usage as worse than ours in the aching epicycle of self-destruction, gifted through Mexico and Afghanistan. We became the mistakes our parents never lamely made through the wealth of our arrogant mirror cracks. The eldest of us, 60 years old, now long ago in our restless time since all the festivals ended and joy became fashioned once by one at a time again, we having grown fatter through the gluttony from all the marketing poured upon us since babyhood as the sellable generation corporations have loved to own. We grew tired after all the exercising so hard for years. Once our bodies reminded us youth sorrowfully wanes with the graceless excesses heaven never promised us. We grew rich and bought everything love demanded of us in the warped charity of selfish benevolence, gnashing in the bellies of the aged and the poor, parking our SUVs in front of the nursing homes, but visiting ourselves so seldom. We got Obama after the Bushes. Clinton also got impeached for free love, and the world daily mocked us as though menopause and retirement are sellable for the price of breakfast. Our smoldering captured on cable television and reality shows, edible as the bad snacks for votive dieters. The clergy stopped tapping our frozen abundance years ago to feel God in the poverty of our purchases, kneeling unto no one. The few Vatican ones pulled our dreams and the paths to reach them back inside your lives, to finger the cultural winds and bravely let them die, trusting only those whose wisdom is fatter than our bellies, traveling back to the fields where history surrenders to the emptiness of what may yet be born, accidentally magical. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my poems. My book's entitled Our Grieving Eden. You can purchase it for $10 through Amazon, or I do have some copies for sale, and you can contact me, Marc Williams, by telephone at area code 704-639-1715. Thanks so much for listening.